Very much for coming. Welcome to the session. I'm here to introduce Mr. Peter Duffy from the Educational Development Centre. This is here to talk to us about going to the mall, which I know appeals to a lot of people. Actually, it's a talk about mobile learning. A bit of background about Peter. Peter is from Australia and used to teach in schools in Australia before he came to Hong Kong. And he's been working for the EDC for quite a few years, and most of us know who he is and have seen his sessions there before. Peter has recently been promoted to becoming the Special Advisor to Walter Yun, the Vice President for Academic Development, on e-learning. So he's going to be a very powerful person in the future. So I'll now hand over to Peter.
What an introduction, thank you. So thank you to Andy and in particular to Julia for inviting me. I'm aware I'm in a difficult position. Difficult because I'm standing between you and your Christmas lunch. So I will try to be dead on time, if not slightly early, if possible. I picked this title, obviously a play on words, but it seemed quite appropriate given the time of the year as well. It was certainly a festival walk on Sunday, and there were so many people shopping for Christmas presents. So, as you're aware, though, hopefully after reading a little bit more about the information, it's not so much about going to a shopping centre, but more looking at this acronym I actually found and is blatantly plagiarised. It's an acronym I found on Wikipedia, of all things, to describe a growing movement in looking at mobile learning and language learning. So it is, if you do a search for MALL in Wikipedia, you'll probably come across the website. But really what I'm looking at today is, in part I'll use this as a metaphor for some of our discussion. But equally as much, I'm really framing the nature of the workshop through three distinct areas. One, looking at people, the nature of students and teachers, how they're changing with the impact of mobile learning. Looking at equally as much some of the products that are available, and I'll say more about that in a moment. And then finally trying to draw some threads together in terms of teaching and learning possibilities. So Andy stole my next slide by the introduction, but that's all right. I need to give a little bit of a context, I suppose, for myself first. As Andy mentioned, I'm previously a high school teacher. I taught art, design, English and IT. This was one of the first video games I've had the fortune of playing. This was my first computer, so I have to acknowledge my research bias in the presentation. I'm an Apple fan, as you may have sort of guessed, and I'm from Australia. In the past, I've also had another slide that overlays Hong Kong onto geographically a map of Australia, and just to get a sense of the scale of where I'm from, the country. So, for you to make the most out of this session, please, at any point in time, feel free to ask any questions. If I'm saying something and you think, look, that's just not accurate, I really disagree with this, I don't mind at all, please feel free to challenge me. Similarly, there's an opportunity for you to talk to each other. Some task I will get you to do, so unfortunately you need to do something before your lunch. And I will definitely finish on time, as I've mentioned, if not earlier. So one quick use, sort of something framing in the use of mobile technology in part. I'm not sure if you've seen this already. You can probably work out what's going to happen from this slide.
My focus is not creative, getting more people interested in taking advanced classes. Having people from more advanced
You missed the punchline, that's all right.
having people from more advanced classes.
So clearly I'm not advocating this as a solution to the use of a mobile phone in your classroom. I have been giving a previous session and literally your phone has gone off 1 second after me showing this, and the whole participant group have looked at me, looked at you and wondered, what is Peter going to do? But I use this as a framing consideration because part of our conversation today, you know, the use of a device, the field is out in terms of what that would be, relates equally to classroom behaviour, what you allow and promote in your classroom and how it's used. Equally threatening and interesting about this is you could be being YouTubed in your class. Google yourself on YouTube, your name and PolyU. I'm not saying you are, but clearly this teacher was, probably without his permission, I would suggest. But there are other situations where a teacher has used this as a point of departure to have a conversation with students about the use of the technology and the expectations for it within that class. So our focus today is really looking at, well, what's current and emerging in this area. In particular, I like this metaphor of a learning ecology by John Seely Brown. He talks about this ecology widely, but specifically I think where it resonates for me is in the nature of university teaching. You know, if we think of this as an ecological system, thanks Simon. Just on the seat is okay. Okay, thanks. If you think of this as an ecological system, two big pebbles are being dropped in our pond quite imminently. One, the 4-year curriculum, and two, the move to a new learning management system. And there's a lot of impact on this in terms of our ecology. There's also more broadly the interrelationships that are changing. If you think back, well, if I personally think back to when I started teaching, I was running off my handouts on a photograph machine, the old ink sort of roller. I would mostly use one of these for mostly handwritten transparencies. So the whole nature of this ecology is changing and being impacted on technology. Equally as much through the behaviour both expected from an academic staff member and also from what your expectations are from a student. So then I'm looking at, well, these sort of interactions in our ecology, teacher and student-wise. And then finally, I'm looking at language learning and the sort of affordances that are possible. And this is where I really need your input. I am not a language learning teacher, okay? But I definitely will hopefully in the session today open your mind to some possibilities. So it's a question for me in terms of first very briefly framing what this session is and is not. Julia asked me to dazzle you, okay? So I'm not as good a singer as I believe as you are, I recently found out, but I will do my best to entertain and also engender some sort of a conversation here. I don't see it as a one-way communication. I will not talk to you for an hour and a half, but it is equally as much an opportunity for me to present some ideas to you. In terms of is not, I'm not a salesman. I am an Apple fan, but I'm not fixated on any particular mobile device. Although I'm open to exploration. Someone asked me before we started, Google Galaxy as a tab or Apple iPad and so on. So these are part of your decisions, I suppose. And for me, I'm not also a salesman of e-learning or a salesman of mobile learning. I think that ship has well and truly sailed. I think it's no longer a question of if. It's simply a question of when and how. When in terms of timing, and how in terms of appropriateness for your pedagogy, appropriateness for your teaching situation. So this is a framing at least of my understandings for this session. And I'm going to definitely try and avoid this as a metaphor. You know, I don't believe mobile learning is so much a fad anymore. I'm not sure how well you can see it from the back row, but basically this lady has fallen down. Someone says you should call 911. Someone gets out their new iPhone 4 maybe, and then all of a sudden everyone's going, okay, and if you turn the screen sideways, the keyboard expands and the lady is still here, unfortunately. So we don't want to really lose sight of the things that are important in terms of considerations here. In terms of briefly a definition, this is a very simplistic one, but in essence it's saying it's what happens when a learner in not a fixed place, not a fixed time, and that they've taken advantage of some opportunity through a mobile device. Think about how education has changed. You know, the best educational scenario is one-to-one. I'm a mentor, you're my apprentice, so I can teach you. Okay, then the massification of education happened, and economic realities mean we have a lecture in a large lecture. It's still at PolyU. And then it moved on, you know, to a case of maybe there's one to many, but now there's many to many. If you think of your role as a lecturer at PolyU, part of the benefit of sessions like this is you get to hear from other people. And equally as much, the changing dynamic of the internet you can now widely explore a range of resources. I will share with you a small collection that I've found over the time I've had to prepare for today and the time that I've had an interest in this area. But equally as much, if we, for example, set up a website for ELC, some discussion point and said, share with your colleagues what you found as a teaching approach that works for the teaching of X, Y, and Z. This is a valuable commodity and talks about this changing nature of technology and its affordances. So then, as I mentioned, this is not about a device, because there are a lot. Even if you think about what's coming in terms of competitors for the iPad. This, draw your attention to, this is actually a very, very old iPad. You think back through the history of Apple products at least. And there are many sort of questions in the past about mobile learning, some difficulties. For example, if I'm designing some learning experience, which one? Which one do I design for? And there are now technological affordances that make this a little bit more easier. Some interesting statistics to set part of our conversation today as well. I didn't actually know it was now 163%. In other words, most people in Hong Kong have more than one phone. Who here has more than one phone? This is where you test if your audience is asleep or awake. And you next ask, who here would like one of these phones? Oh, okay, here you go. Okay.
That's true.
But it's interesting in terms of some of the data that's coming up. I mean, almost the givens here are that bandwidth will increase, ubiquity will increase in terms of being able to access material, and the devices will become more prevalent. Even in the last 2 years, if you think back to how many people you walk around PolyU and look to who is holding an iPhone as an example of one of the most recent smart devices, they're definitely increasing, at least in my anecdotal understanding of this. Short competition. I want you to vote. Sort of very Christian in the lion's den style. So this means down, this means up. So if you think it's over, thumbs up. If you think it's under, thumbs down. So iPad sales since 2001, over or under 10 million? Okay, generally reflective of the answer, but I'll show you the answers in a moment. Number 2, within the first 30 hours of the iPhone's release, over or under 270,000 units. And I should clarify, this is the old iPhone. Okay, 270,000. 30 hours, a little over a day. Over or under? Okay. Thank you. Next one, over or under 100,000 applications in the Apple Store. All right. This one, particularly interesting in Hong Kong. Over or under 1 million iPhones, the new one, iPhone 4, sold in Hong Kong in the first weekend. 1 million. Think of the population of Hong Kong, about 6 point something. Okay. All right. Thank you. 1 billion applications downloaded since 2007. That's a lot of applications. And you can't do this. You can't wave up. And the last one, 1,000 applications specifically for the iPad, probably the newest device. Over or under? And whoever went to my workshop 2 weeks ago had some slight advantage because I used this same data set. Most interesting, I'll give you a moment to look at it, but most interesting from this culture, this geographical and learning ecology, over 1 million phones. That is incredible, I think. But it's not to say 1 million people bought one phone. I read recently someone had made over 100,000 Hong Kong dollars simply by buying an iPhone here at around the 5,000 Hong Kong dollar mark and going to China and selling it for around 7,000 or 8,000 because supply and demand. You couldn't get them and they would cross the border and sell them. So clearly here maybe some of those million users have got more than one. So, I mean,